Hi there, and thanks for listening. If you're enjoying our podcast and have a recommendation about someone you think that we should have on to share their voice and journey with the world, by all means, let us know. It could be an aid worker, monastic, author, journalist, doctor, resistance leader, really anyone with some tie or another to the ongoing situation in Myanmar. To offer up a name, go to our website, insightmyanmar.org, and let us know. But for now, just sit back and take a listen to today's podcast.
And welcome back. Today I am joined by Maia, and we are going to be discussing probably quite a few closely related topics, but we'll be focusing on the immigration system within the United States, not just for the Myanmar population, but other populations as well, but largely the many difficulties and complications that are faced by people who are attempting to get to the United States to flee conflict or flee disaster. So before we get into any of that, Maya, I'd like to thank you very much for giving us your time, and I'd like to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself for our audience.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be on the show. I am an immigration attorney in private practice. I've been an attorney for close to 25 years now. I started out working with prisoners, actually, from other countries who were faced with the prospect of being detained for a very long time here or being sent back to their country. And I expanded that when I opened my own firm, my own business, to work with refugees here in Michigan, where there are a lot of Burmese refugees here, and mostly from Chin State, but not totally from Chin State. And so I started working with refugees, helping them do green cards, citizenship, petitioning their family back from Myanmar. And so I just got very interested in the culture and it's such an interesting country and such an interesting culture. And of course, since the coup, I've gotten even more involved in trying to help people get out of Burma, and once they're here, to try to help them stay. Some of them are students, and so we apply for political asylum for them. Some of them come on a visitor's visa, and again, we apply for asylum for them. This is a process which I know we're going to talk about, which can take years, and so it's complicated and can be painful for people because they don't want to feel that they're abandoning Burma. They just need to be safe at the moment. Most of these people have been active in some kind of anti-coup activity, right? And they may even have warrants out for their arrest. And so I try to help as many people as I can. And yeah, I guess that's an introduction. That's who I am.
But it gives us a really good understanding of sort of how you tick and what you do. And What I was reflecting on the other day actually is that we don't think of immigration law as a particularly sexy or expansive part of the legal system, but it occurred to me that you and I have in preparation for this interview spent I worked about 5.5 hours discussing various ins and outs of immigration law in the U.S. and elsewhere, and that is the longest amount of time that I've spent preparing with a guest. So that the wealth of knowledge that you bring and the depth and complexity of this issue and the related social and political and legal issues is, I think, genuinely underestimated by the average person. We don't give enough thought to immigration law when we think about the political process, when we think about elections, when we think about how the country functions. But it is enormous.
Yeah, no, it's very Byzantine
Mm,
and complex, and even immigration lawyers argue between themselves what particular laws mean or the best way to pursue a case. Funny story is in law school, I took one uh, elective, which was immigration law, and it was incredibly boring because the professor was a employment lawyer who just
mhm,
helped, not just, but she brought nurses over from Canada, and that was all she did in her a law business, and she would read to us out loud from various manuals. And I said, boy, you'd never catch me being an immigration lawyer. And they spend all day just filling out forms, and they talk in numbers. Form 485, 589. Did you file a 601 yet? And I said, no way will I ever get into that law.
mm.
And of course, famous last words, here I am.
Yeah, it's very often, I think it really is a matter of presentation, and I think that's quite pervasive. Actually, it's not just the way that immigration law was presented to you as a law student; it's also wrapped up in this greater issue that for the immigration process, it's very often not the actual needs and merits of an individual applicant, but the way that you're able to present their narrative and their story. Because while we're on the topic of stories, I knew a man. I used to go to language practice with him. He was from Togo. He spoke French, and he said that there were five of them from Togo who came to Australia as refugees. And what he said was all five of them had the same circumstances. They were all fleeing from the same violence. They're all coming. Two of them were school teachers, and those of them who were school teachers were able to more eloquently write
Mm,
down their circumstances and explain their cases. They
mm.
received refugee protections, and the other three didn't.
Yeah, that's sad.
Yeah.
Um, Here in the States, they have done the figures, and I'm assuming they're close to correct, that you're 5 times more likely to lose your case if you don't have a lawyer to help
Mm,
prepare your story. And that's and so much depends on personalities, right? The
mhm,
personality of the person and how they present themselves, their credibility.
mhm.
So much depends on looking the judge or the interviewer in the eye and explaining to them your story. I think in your case, the person may or may not have had a personal interview and had to depend on writing their story.
It was
Um,
mostly written. They had to file, like they had to write down their reasons for the
yes,
application, pen and paper, while in Togo, and submit that.
yeah, and that's right. And here, even you have to submit a written personal statement with your asylum application. And I send it back to the client and back to the client and back to the client and say, no, I need more details. No, what's this person's name? What was the date? Where did this happen? How many times did the policeman hit you? Um, you say you were beaten in jail. Who beat you? What did they
Yeah.
use? The sticks, the batons, their fists. How many men were they?
Yeah.
Just detail after detail after detail, because that's what makes your story credible. I also fight the good fight against Chat GPT,
Hmm.
because I have these almost, I don't want to say illiterate because they're not, but they don't speak English, is not their first language, okay? And yet when you ask them to write a story, they write this totally sophisticated
Yep.
um, story. And I have to say, this is nice, but you didn't write it. You didn't write it.
Yeah.
And if you have to, you want to write it in Burmese, you want to write it in Chin, write it in your native language and we'll find somebody to translate it. The very first thing the officer asks when you go for your interview is, who wrote your story?
Yeah.
And so I want that person to be able to say, I wrote my story. The lawyer looked at it, the lawyer criticized it, the lawyer edited it, but I wrote it, it's my story. Some communities some communities, they have a story and they pass it around.
Oh
This
God.
is not for me. They pass it around. I had a client from a country that I won't name say, here's my story, it's a good one, it worked for my cousin. And, and so use so, and of course I didn't take his case, because people are desperate, right? People
Mm.
are desperate to stay in this country, so and to escape their country of origin, possibly for economic reasons, not for because they're being politically persecuted, but economic reasons
Mm.
is not an asylum claim, right? They're economic migrants, and so that's not how you come, is through asylum.
But
So,
I think the ChatGPT one's an important point, just because I teach Burmese students, and I teach I just finished the semester of teaching academic writing. So my background's linguistics, and I've had students submit work that was written with ChatGPT, and we have ChatGPT checker, but I think
mm,
the students don't really appreciate it, because I've had them, like, in the middle of class. They've sent me something that I said, okay, go work on this and then come back. And then they send me something and I look at it and I go, like, okay, you didn't write this. Because if you read enough of a certain type of text, and I'm familiar with Burmese students and how they write, and
right,
I'm familiar with academic English because that's my milieu, and I'm
right.
familiar with ChatGPT because it's pervasive. I look at it and I'm like, I know that you didn't write this because an actual native English speaker does not write sentences like this, but ChatGPT thinks they do.
Or
And
have
a judge would see that, I assume.
yes, either the asylum. Oh, you can, because you work with it, you can smell Chat GPT a
Mm,
mile away. Just
yeah.
you, it, yeah, and people don't realize it when they're using it. They don't realize it. So,
African language speakers, it looks proficient English to them. They don't
well,
see
of
the
course,
nuances.
it's super proficient. That's the problem, right? People
Mm,
are writing. I mean, what I love in a statement is mistakes.
mm,
Grammatical mistakes, spelling mistakes, awkward phrasing,
mm.
because you know what? That person wrote that story from their heart. And
Yes,
that's what I'm looking for. And that's what,
yes.
so maybe so as not to get confused, there's two, two ways that somebody's going to look at that statement. One is if you come legally into this country on a visitor visa or a student visa, and you say, but I don't want to go back, I'm afraid, I want to file for asylum.
Hmm.
Then you file administratively, it's called, and you don't go in front of a judge immediately. You go in front of an asylum officer, who is a immigration um, employee, and you go and have an interview, and they're the ones who are going to say,
Hmm.
did you write your statement, and look at all your documentation, have an interview. If you fail your interview and then you get out of status for some reason, like you drop out of school, then you're going to go in front of an immigration judge. Or if you're in this country undocumented, which very few Burmese are, but say you were totally,
Mm.
and you've overstayed your visa for 10 years, right? And you never got caught. But then you do get caught and you're put in front of an immigration judge. Then your asylum application goes directly to the judge. Um, and the judge, the court, is the one that's going to read your statement. But in either case, it's made part of the application. It's
Mm.
You need to attach this statement. It's not quite as important in court because you get to testify, right? Right away, and the judge probably too lazy to read the whole file anyway, but wants you to
Yeah.
tell him or her what happened to you.
Now, I want to come back because you use specific terminology there, and I know that this is a very hot button issue in the United States. The terminological distinction between legal, illegal, and documented, undocumented. And I know that some people use these completely synonymously. And my understanding had been that legality and documentation are two different axes, that you can be legal and documented, and you can be illegal and undocumented, but you can also be legal but undocumented if you've crossed the border without paperwork for the purposes of seeking asylum, as would be provided for in international law. And you can be documented but illegal if you did submit documentation at the border, there's a record of you entering the country, but you overstayed the visa. So, as an immigration lawyer, what is the actual correct application of these terms?
Well, I try never to use the term illegal because people are not illegal.
Okay.
People are undocumented because they have entered without inspection. It's called iwis is how we refer to people. We refer to them as iwis. They entered without inspection.
But if you
Um,
enter through the airport and overstay, you have been inspected, correct?
Correct. You have made a legal entry into the
Yes.
United States, and so you can file an asylum claim. You can actually marry a U.S. citizen, even
Mhm.
if you've been a, an overstay for years, as long as you don't, commit crimes in the meantime.
Mhm.
But if you marry a U.S. citizen, they can file a petition for you so you can adjust your status through the marriage, and you do not have to leave the country to
Okay.
get your visa. If you did not enter legally, you can marry the U.S. citizen, but you're going to have to go back to your home country and come back in through the embassy.
Oh, so if you walk across the border, not through any official border checkpoint, then that is treated differently in law than if you had flown in through the airport, handed in your passport, and simply overstayed on your visa.
Absolutely. One is a legal entry, one is not. One is an entry without inspection. So we can call the entry illegal, and there is a federal crime called um, illegal reentry. So if you got deported because you robbed a bank, you did your time in prison, and then you got sent
Hmm.
back to any country,
Yeah.
and then you sneak back over the border, but you get caught. That's a federal crime. That's federal. That's illegal reentry, and you're going to go to federal prison for at least a year. I think
Oh wow.
is the guideline.
But
So
so,
yes, huge difference between a legal entry and a not legal entry.
is it the case? Because this was my understanding, and I think it's an important issue. Is it the case that entering the United States without going through an official point of entry for the explicit purpose of seeking asylum is itself a legally protected action?
Well, that's a fraught question right now, my friend.
Okay.
Yes, international law says anybody has a right to go to another country and seek political asylum
Okay.
because for fear of persecution, torture in their home country. The United States government, in all its compassion, is trying to narrow that and narrow that and narrow that down so that the latest is if there's too many people coming across the southern border, well, we're just going to close the border. And if you have stayed at any length of time in another country before you manage to come up across the border, they're going to say, well, you were firmly resettled. You should have, why didn't you apply for asylum in that country? And you didn't, so you can't apply here.
So if a Guatemalan transits through Mexico, that undermines the legitimacy of their asylum claim in the United States.
Yeah, that's the way that's the way U.S. asylum law is going, which is, ridiculous, of course. So people are going to have to find other ways to get in. So I mean, the government is really trying to close down. Not that other countries aren't trying to do the same thing, but they're trying to close down the whole system because this border situation is so fraught, right? And Trump and the right wingers make such a huge deal about, all these people at the border. So it just becomes this, it just becomes this big point of contention. And let me be clear, though, everybody has a right under international law to seek asylum in another country. However, the chances of those people actually getting asylum are not very big. Because most of the people are economic migrants. They want a better life for their family. Or they've been harassed by gangs or criminal extortion or any number of things that do not rise to the level of asylum, do not rise to the level of being persecuted for their beliefs.
But it's so we might be getting a little bit abstract and philosophical, and I know that you're very sort of compassion minded, so we'd probably be on the same page here. But economic migrant has always been a very strange thing to me, because if you're fleeing from a military regime that is consciously starving your village, or if you're fleeing from a natural disaster that has created a famine, or if you're fleeing from an economic depression that has made it impossible for you to earn the money necessary to buy the food to eat, the outcome of all three of these situations is that you're starving. It seems to me that any one of these would be an equally legitimate reason to try to seek a survivable life elsewhere.
Amen. But it doesn't work that way.
It seems counterintuitive.
So yeah, well, that's one word to put it. I mean, it is cruel, and it's abandoning very many people. And you didn't even talk about people, about the climate change, climate refugees, right?
Yeah.
What covers what you're talking about is something called temporary protected status. And we call it TPS. This does not have to be specific to a certain person, like, if you send me back, they're going to arrest me. No, something has made the country so unlivable, be it a hurricane or a coup, or just like Sudan has TPS right now, right? It's just tremendous political upheaval that no matter who you are, as long as you're from that country, the government will grant you temporary protected status. So, but you have to be in this country to get it. You can't apply for TPS from Sudan, for example. Burmese have temporary protected status. If you've been here since March, they keep redesignating Burma as a country eligible for TPS. So that covers people who are, because of Min Aung Hlaing, right, they need a better life, and so they're fleeing, and they're afraid of being conscripted and arrested for having posters or a picture of the lady in
Mm,
their phone, right? And the prison conditions in Myanmar are absolutely
horrific.
abhorrent, which we talked about on the show, right? So,
Yeah.
so this is TPS.
But
This is
TPS can be taken away.
it it can temporary is the first word.
Yeah.
So it is not it does not lead to a green card, and it can be eventually closed off, shut down. Yes, you're right. And Trump tried to shut down TPS for several countries, Haiti, I think, and Sudan, but he lost in court. So
Mm.
no, there are people here from Nicaragua from a Hurricane Mitch, which was back before many of my clients were even born. Those people are still here on TPS,
Okay,
right?
so
And
it can last for quite some time.
it can last, yes, for decades. And there is a movement in advocacy groups to please let these people move forward and let them apply for a green card and then citizenship, because they've rebuilt their whole lives here, right?
If someone's on a temporary protection status in the United States and they have a child while they're in the United States under TPS, what happens?
They have, they have a U.S. citizen in the family.
Yeah, so that so
Which
the jus soli principle still applies there. The person born on U.S. soil becomes a U.S. citizen.
Trump never was able to take that away, although he threatened it. If
Okay,
you are born in the United States, you are a U.S. citizen.
okay, okay.
But that child does not become, and I say this with air quotes, useful
Mhm.
until they're 21, and they can petition for their parent.
Also, you don't automatically
It
because
does not help. Babies
okay.
do not, we call them anchor babies. I don't know why,
That's
because
what I was going to say. Like Fox News keeps going on about anchor babies. I thought it was like you can jump over the border, have a baby, and then boom, you know your application is almost guaranteed.
no, absolutely not. And
Okay.
and in fact, the parents, if the parents get deported, if the parents get deported, the judge will say, well, your child could stay here, but you've got to go, because the child is a U.S. citizen. So that, of course, they don't want to leave the child here, so they have to get them a
Of course.
passport. But yeah, babies do not automatically help, and babies as U.S. citizens are eligible for things like food stamps,
Mm,
which we don't want to spread around too much because they'll try to take it away. But yeah,
yeah.
they're a U.S. citizen with all the rights and guarantees
Privileges.
that
Yeah.
any U.S. citizen has, right? They just can't help their parents.
But so okay, so on this TPS then, so the country, so Myanmar as a country is designated as TPS.
Yes.
Excellent, good, awesome. But you have to be within the United States to take advantage of this.
Yes.
So that now raises the very important logistical question. If you are in Burma and you want to get to the United States so that you can take advantage of this TPS, what like is there an avenue for this? Are they making it easier because they've said this country is in strife and we want to help you, or are they making it harder because they're reflexively saying, yo, any Burmese person who wants to come to this country is clearly trying to abuse the TPS system? What's the pathway and what's the reaction from immigration?
Well, and this is my experience only, right? So, and I am one small potato attorney, so I wouldn't want it to be the gospel truth. But my experience is that although the people at the U.S. Embassy in Yangon are very friendly and forthcoming, um, I don't see that they're very good about giving people visas. Um, so people don't want to come to get TPS, but people want to come because they want to file for asylum, because
Mhm.
asylum leads to a green card, right? You sort of have to talk them into TPS once they get here. So as
Oh,
soon as they're eligible for TPS, like they make that a cutoff date, which keeps changing. But so right now it's March. So somebody who comes next week is not going to be eligible for TPS. They would have to wait for the if Myanmar doesn't get better but gets worse, the date to change.
Oh,
So
so
there
it's
are
not like perpetual, like until we
no,
turn it off.
no. They
Oh,
keep redesignating it. Yeah, it's like I said, it's everything is Byzantine. Nothing is simple. So you have to make that cutoff date. So students getting a student visa used to be a tried and true way for young
mhm.
people to get here, but now the embassy in Yangon is not handing those out
Yeah.
very nicely, very consistently. I think there is, and again, this is what I hear, that there's urban guerrilla warfare in Yangon itself now, and so the embassy isn't always open,
Yes.
doesn't always schedule interviews promptly. I've been trying to get a visitor visa for a family member of a client to come, and it was originally for a wedding, but the wedding's long past. But
Mm.
there's you can't you're supposed to be able to go and make your own appointment to go for your interview, and there aren't any dates available, or if there's a day available it fills up before you can even hit all the correct um, buttons. And the students, every single student that I've had talk to me in the last couple months, they've all gone to Vietnam to get their visa. They've all gone to Ho Chi Minh City to the embassy
Mm.
um, to get their U.S. visas.
But
Um,
even then, though, because this is the thing, I had a case. Well, I say I had a case. My friend's sister tried to come to Australia as a student. She was accepted by an Australian university. She filled out all of her medical paperwork. She passed. She's healthy. She's young. She's legitimately qualified to go to university. Her parents were going to support her financially. She passed every single requirement that the state put on her, and she was able to submit all her paperwork through the embassy in a timely fashion. Plus, she had her sister in Australia advocating for her and offering to put her up in her apartment. And she was rejected on the grounds of not being, I think the terminology is a genuine temporary entrant. The idea being that, well, we just think because you're Burmese, you might try to actually stay in Australia after you've spent years in this country learning the language and the culture and becoming tertiary qualified and contributing through your job. Heaven forbid that Australia should suffer something like that. So they just rejected her out of hand. It wasn't because she couldn't access the embassy. It was simply because they said, we assume that Burmese people are going to try and game and manipulate the system in some way, shape, or form, because those Burmese students who are living in Australia have also been granted, like in Australia, it's called a temporary protection visa, but it's the same basic principle as the US. So because they've received the TPV, um, I think the Australian government reaction has been, well, we think all new Burmese arrivals would probably be trying to abuse this system. So we just want to keep them in a war zone because that seems good in some way. I don't know.
and they talk U.S. government talks out of both sides of their mouth. I mean, if
Mm.
you look at the videos that they put on the embassy website, oh, we're in support of the Burmese people and blah blah
Hmm.
blah and all this patriotic garbage. But yeah, then they turn people down. So I have
Hmm.
had the same thing where somebody got a full scholarship to Indiana University, and and then didn't get the visa, which is apparently
Hmm.
why people are skedaddling to Vietnam to get their visa.
And,
Um,
and it's horrific. This
it is.
high-minded rhetoric that comes out of the
I
United
know. I
States.
know. I know. And you know what the funny thing is that I have not met a Burmese. Now I'm sure there are some because they'll get inculcated into the American way of life and you know all the and make a lot of money or whatever. Um, but I have never met a Burmese person that I've worked with yet who says they don't want to go back to Burma when this is all
Mm.
over. Right? They all want to go back.
Of course, of course.
Yeah, and they sometimes I have to almost literally twist their arms to say, yes, we will do a TPS. Yes, we will do an asylum. It's okay. If you get these and then Myanmar is peaceful again, you say, thank you very much, America. I appreciate what you gave me, but you know what? I'm going back home. And
But
that that works, right? You can do that.
but I suspect a little bit of the hesitation would be coming from this sort of situation. So I was interviewing someone recently who went to Karenni State, previously called Kayah State. And what he reported was that obviously a very large part of that population fled over the very porous border into Thailand
Right.
because that's what people do in times of conflict. Okay, fine. And the various resistance groups had managed to recapture about half of the state. To be fair, they've liberated about half the state. Now, the definition of liberation is varied because, as was explained to me, liberating the state doesn't mean that you've actually expelled the military presence, partially because you keep a small military presence around to prevent the military from carpet bombing the area, right? They're not going to carpet bomb their own people. If you get rid of that military base, all you have are civilians and resistance groups, and the military is just going to run a bombing campaign. So you keep the military base active, and they, at nighttime, will still use their mortars and artillery to shell the villages. So that's just part of your nighttime routine, is that shells are going to come in, and even if you're not being shelled, he says, well, the buildings don't have roofs because of bombing. And a lot of the buildings have landmines put in them because the military, when they retreat, they like to leave booby traps around so they can try and kill as many people as possible on the way out. This was the situation. And yet, when the resistance groups had announced the liberation of certain areas, Thai authorities came in and said, well, hang on, if these areas are liberated, then that means that you can return. And they forcibly moved thousands of refugees back into Myanmar
Yeah.
because, well, you were temporarily protected while your area was under invasion, but now you say it's liberated, so go enjoy your roofless, landmine riddled hut. And of course, they're living without any form of shelter or tents at best in temporary refugee encampments, subsisting on white rice and water and nothing else. But the Thai authorities don't want to have anything to do with them. So I suspect that because of experiences like that, there might be a hesitation to accept a temporary protection visa, understanding that a lot of Myanmar victims of this war have had temporary protection status just ripped out from under them and sent back into the country. And I'm wondering whether there's this hesitation, like, oh my God, if I go to America under a TPS, not under asylum, does that mean that they're going to turn around one day, knock on my door and say, okay, get your stuff, get on a plane, you're going back because we've decided that your city is no longer in conflict?
Well, that's interesting. I'm glad you told me that story because when it was time to renew, so Burmese who came, they registered for TPS and it was going to expire last May. And United States State Department was a little bit involved with other parts of the world, so they didn't renew it. And most of the clients told me it's not going to be renewed. I'm panicked, right?
Mm,
Then I'm going to get deported. And I said, no, no. Burma's getting worse, not better. They're not.
yeah.
They will renew it. I swear to God, I will. They are going to renew it. And
Okay.
I said, if I ever have anything less than 100% belief in what I'm telling you, I will tell you that.
Yeah.
But no, they will renew it. And of course, they did renew it. But now I understand why people didn't really believe me when I said. Um, and the other thing is that's why I ask people as many ways that you can get protected, protect yourself.
Yeah.
So don't so get TPS and you don't come to this country on TPS. You have to get here and then ask for TPS, right? So you have to get here on some kind of visa and then ask for asylum. But that story about um, people being forced back, I have quite a few clients in Maysot who have fled to Maysot, and
Mm,
it's such a worrisome,
hmm.
horrifying situation, and the people in Maysot are living hand to mouth and
Yeah.
having a horrible, horrible time and are frightened. And those people who have been forced back, if they're of the right age, they can be conscripted,
Yes.
right? So, which is which is another horrible issue, and it's one that I make all my asylum clients, if they're the right age, I make that one of their claims, is that is the conscription. So
But see, that's quite ironic because I saw the documentation in Australia when my friend's sister was rejected. Obviously, the government sends a whole bunch of boilerplate, and the conscription law was actually enumerated among the reasons that the government felt that she was not a genuine temporary entrant. So it seems that, if anything, in the Australian case, the fact that you are facing the possibility of conscription is going to reduce the likelihood that the government will accept your entry to Australia, because they're going, well, clearly you're trying to escape from this inhuman treatment, so we don't want to be complicit in that.
well,
It's the worst.
talk about counterintuitive. I
Mm,
mean, let's try to beat these people once they're down, right?
yep.
Yeah, but once, so I don't know Australian asylum law. Once you got, if you could get past the visa obstacle and get here, then you can use those things as an asylum claim, and it's perfectly acceptable
Okay.
that you're asking for asylum. The tricky part gets is when you have to lie to the admission, to the officer who's interviewing you at the embassy,
Mm,
because that, your interview is saved perpetually in cyberspace, right? So
yeah.
they can always go back and say, well, you here's what you said at your, here's what you said at your interview. And you know that you have to show that, so if you're coming to visit your child, or to go for a to go for to go to a wedding. And of course, I tell my client, yeah, let's do that. Get them here. Then we'll apply for asylum. No problem. But you got to get them here. Right.
Mm.
But when they go to the interview at the embassy, they have to show that they did not quit their job, that they did not sell their car, that they did not empty their bank accounts, that they did not sell their house. Right. They have to have proof that they're really, really, really only going for the for this wedding, right? And so it's, those are painful choices for people.
I mean, naturally, I'm just wondering about, like, how you can. So the asylum has to be done from the US. I understand that it's very difficult to apply for asylum within Myanmar proper.
No,
Uh,
it's
it's not.
impossible.
Oh, really?
You mean apply for U.S. asylum?
Yes.
No, you have to be in the United States.
So
Or you
you don't.
want
There's no program at the embassy to apply for political asylum.
no, no, sir.
Good
That's
God.
that yes, that's what complicates everything, because I have these long, painful conversations with clients. Just get them here. Let's work on getting them here. Once you get them here, turn it over to me. We'll do the asylum claim, no problem. But you got to get them here, and
But
so
so,
that's a whole other set of
so
obstacles.
how do you get them? That's the question then, because it seems to be the case across the board that countries, when they can, try to reduce the number of people going there for asylum. Everybody wants to act like they're a, shining city on a hill, and this is where, the poor and tired want to come and start new lives, but nobody actually wants to make good on that. So it seems like one of the easiest things you can do is just make it impossible for the people who need to get the asylum to enter the country in the first place. So how can the Burmese get there without falling into, any number of these a number of these traps?
Well, it's that's the conundrum. Welcome to my world, right? That's what I have to deal with. Yeah.
So okay, so let's just look at some options here. So let's say I'm Burmese. I just say, look, I want to fly to the United States. Now, you've said you have to show that you didn't sell your house and your car and empty your bank account, which, okay, complicated, tricky. But let's say that I just say, hey, I really want to see the Statue of Liberty, and I've saved up a bit of money, and I'm going, as a tourist to the United States. Um, is that likely to get me in the door?
It's that's a toughie, because they will ask the visa application, which is done online before you ever get to an interview. And again, the interviews for visitor visas are not happening very often right now
Mm.
in Burma. But just a regular old visitor coming to see the Statue of Liberty, now it would be looked at with askance, right? Because
Hmm.
yeah, you are. So on this application, you have to say where are you going to stay when you go. Do you have any relatives in the United States? um, you know where are you going to stay? So many people want, yeah, so you'd be better off going to New York for a wedding and being able to produce the wedding invitation or a graduation invitation. Because right now, just to come and say, "Oh, I'm a single guy, I want to come to New York, see the bright lights, drink a few beers, go see the Statue of Liberty," nah, not going to happen.
Okay. So it's easier if you already have established connections to the United States.
And can show you have a real reason to come.
What the real reason to like I want to go to a place. That's a reason for me. Like,
You want to, no, I understand that you want to go on vacation, but but right now, given the
yeah, it's
circumstances in
weird.
Burma, if they're not letting students with a full scholarship, if they're not giving them uh, visas, they're not going to let a single guy, because obviously you're going to come to and very few people who are just coming on for want to go for vacation um, are not going to go through all that proof of you know
Yeah.
there's a great amount of proof of your situation back home.
Okay.
Not you have to show you have a job, you have money in the bank, blah blah blah. Or
Okay.
another one I always use is family members, that you're not going to leave your abandon your family. But of course, people do, because they realize once they come here and get um, if they win asylum, then they can file a petition, more paperwork, to bring their wife and their kids, or their spouse and their children, to bring them from Burma.
It
As long as
sounds like a bail negotiation and an arraignment. Like, I have ties to the community, Your Honor, and I've put up $5,000. Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah. I hadn't thought of that analogy, but yeah, it's kind of like that. I mean, because of the situation that Burma is in, and because the American government um, says one thing but actually deals with people trying to leave Burma. I mean, even the NUG, when I'm asking them to provide some letters of recommendation for people, um, I've gotten the answer back from an intermediary. Well, NUG doesn't want to support people to come to the United States because we want them all to stay here, or that we want
mm,
them to stay and make in Thailand. And I'm saying, well, in Thailand,
not
it's
good.
extremely dire situations. How can you say that?
Yeah.
And again, I've heard, and this is what I hear, not what I know, is that NUG gives some money, but not a lot, and gives a
Mm,
safe house, but then not forever, and you have to move on. And so people are just living very precarious lives. There is one more way to come that we haven't talked about,
okay.
um, because it's even less successful from my point of view than the ways we've talked about, is through humanitarian parole. And this is when you say you need, because of you're in imminent danger, you would like to be immediately paroled into the United States, and that's temporary. It's for a year, but of course, during that year, you can apply for whatever you need to apply with. And this is how NUG ministers have gotten their family here, um,
Okay.
through the Bangkok through the embassy in Bangkok. But when I try to do it for my regular folks in Mae Sot, they've all been turned down so far. I still
Mm.
have some in the pipeline, but they say no, they should go the established route and not try to jump the queue, and they should all go apply to be with the UNHCR and be resettled as refugees.
Because it feels like what you're describing with this parole is like it's similar to refugee protections, but just not as
Yes,
strong.
yes, it's not as strong. I mean, if you know, I started working with Burmese people who came as refugees through Malaysia. They'd all lived in Kuala Lumpur for a few
Yeah.
years before they got here, and refugees get case management. They get medical insurance. It- they get they get help, right? Asylees before, and then after a year they can apply for a green card, and then they're pretty much on their own. They get work permits immediately. Asylees get nothing because we didn't invite them to come in like we invite refugees, right? Asylees have to fight their way in, and then they cannot file for a work permit for 5 months. And so they have to have somebody to support them, where people work under the table, we say, right?
Mm.
People work for cash, um, and they have no documentation to show who they are. They're just trying to apply for asylum. So the difference in the um, your label of documentation, it makes a huge difference to how you can exist here.
Can you comment on, because I know that there are migrant work programs and seasonal laborer programs and things like that. Is that something that could be used?
Yeah, if they would expand those, sure.
Ah, okay.
But the problem is, before 9/11, George Bush was pressured a lot by the business community to expand these programs because we needed workers, right? And
Mm.
so, and Bush was all for it. But then 9/11 came and just changed the whole um, atmosphere around immigrants, and those programs are shut down, or very much um, diminished. Yes, I mean, I'm a big believer in those programs if they're
Mm.
if they're well carried out and the people are not mistreated once they're here. I mean,
Yeah.
in California now they have to pass a law that it's okay to take a drink of water if you're out in the field and you
Jesus.
might die. I mean, it sounds like a Monty Python skit, right? So you always have to be watchful because they're the people at the bottom of any barrel that you want to define, right? They really are very vulnerable. I know when I have Congolese clients come into my office, um, and I say, "Are you working?" Yeah, yes, we're working. I say, "Where do you work?" And I say, "I know you're going to tell me JBS, right? That it's the meat packing plant,
Oh, okay.
right?" So it's always the bottom of the barrel. It used to be the Hispanic, mostly Mexicans who work there, and now it's all people. It's all refugee people because they can't speak English, so that they think so they go to the abattoir, right? They go work
Yeah.
and I always tell them, practice your English, learn to speak English so you can get out of there before you get hurt. Or the what I really feel bad for is the Syrian refugees who go there. I say, that's haram working in a place where
Yeah.
they kill animals like that. Are you kidding me? That whole
Yeah.
building is haram. But those are the jobs that refugees get.
It really kind of feels like America never really gave up that dependence on slave labor. It just sort of takes on different forms as the decades and centuries
Absolutely.
move forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. Yep. No, absolutely. And you know what's interesting, and I don't hear the politicians. I don't hear either Harris or Trump unless I've missed it. They talk a lot about the middle class. Who fucking talks about the poor? You know,
Hmm.
I don't think anybody since Bobby Kennedy, and I mean the real Bobby Kennedy, I, talked about poor people when he was campaigning. Nobody talks about them.
Well, the poor don't vote because they're busy trying to survive.
Yeah. Well, maybe they would vote if they thought there was somebody that cared about him. Bobby Kennedy would have won if he hadn't been murdered.
Yeah. Yeah, that
But
family has not been successful, unfortunately.
no,
Uh,
no, no. But it is amazing when you think how Bobby Kennedy used to go in front of wealthy audiences and talk about poor people, right?
yeah.
And it's like, there was some beautiful things of people. I think listened. I mean, I think we shut off when and I could be missing a whole. I could be missing a lot, right? I could be missing that there are people that are talking about poor people, I don't see it. I don't see them talking about homeless people either. Every city I go to is filled with homeless people, but we don't. Kamala Harris have a plan for homeless people? I mean, Trump would have a plan. He just,
Jesus Christ.
yeah,
I'm
right.
sure he would. But I mean, Kamala, look, I was just by coincidence, I was watching a thing last night on black propaganda, right? The this question of like black police, are they fundamentally black or are they fundamentally police? And you know, the spoiler alert, the conclusion of the video is that black police are fundamentally police first, and there have been many famous instances of predominantly or entirely black police units who are as violent, if not more violent, with predominantly black communities in the United States than white police units who do similar things. And Kamala Harris came up, and there was this complicated, tortured discussion like, well, is Kamala Harris progressive? Is Kamala Harris not progressive? It's like, well, okay, so in some cases, Kamala Harris is very progressive and has taken on as a district attorney, as a governor, has taken on policies that were incredibly beneficial and helpful and serve to minimize youth being put into the jail system. Beautiful, awesome. But her solution to truancy was to imprison parents of truant children in San Francisco as a DA. And I'm like, that's not that's not good. That doesn't make sense.
Well, how is that? Yeah, how is that any more ethical or moral than Trump separating families at the border, right?
And the
Instead
kids
of
in cages,
supporting
and yeah.
families when they need it so they can send their kids to school.
And it
Um,
wasn't even that. It was this the moment of like, could you imagine the feeling of the state having lost your child like it's an errant Amazon package? Like, I'm here to pick up my kid. I don't know, he's in some warehouse somewhere. I don't know. Like, I
well,
would just imagine that.
well, I mean that happens. It doesn't have to be Kamala Harris's jurisdiction. The Child Protective Services take they take kids from their families and when they when when they want to. Basically, the state does that, and they do it mostly to black kids, brown kids,
Mm,
indigenous kids. Family separation. Yeah, I have to laugh with. Didn't see what you were referring to, but having worked with been a member of the NAACP locally and stuff, everybody knows that black cops are the worst, right?
mm,
Black, you know, black youth are just as scared of black cops than white cops because they can be so ruthless, right?
mm.
So that's just kind of a given in a Black community. They know that. I mean,
And it,
I would hope that that's changed, that some of the police departments have gone out and recruited, you know, Black people who are from that community and who are less
well,
lethal.
the argument in this particular instance was that the recruitment does come from those communities, almost exclusively. It comes from those communities. The
Mm,
argument was actually a really interesting one. Whether or not it's true, I can't speak to. But what was the thesis was basically that the legacy of slavery and then Jim Crow and decades and decades and decades of entrenched and institutionalized racism in the United States was such that Black men were robbed of the opportunity to achieve conventional Western culture concepts of manhood, right? Which, the fact that even throughout the 60s and the 70s they were called boy really sort of underlined that. Mr. T, the actor, said that he actually named himself Mr. T because he wanted the first thing out of white people's mouths to be Mr. because he watched his father as a grown man being called boy, and he didn't want to be a victim of that. And so the argument being made is that police and military are the two avenues through which Black men were able to achieve the martiality and masculinity that had been denied to so many. And the same argument was actually being made by Atun Shea, who's is a commentator on Civil War history, for Black people who marched in Confederate military parades during the Reconstruction era, saying that, well, yeah, they weren't Confederate soldiers, they were slaves of Confederate soldiers, but they were being given the opportunity to march in the parade and be given the martial glory that had been the exclusive preserve of white people up until then. And they took that opportunity with both hands because it had been deprived them their whole lives and the rest of their community. And the argument being made was that Black cops are so vicious because it's not about being that in that community. It's actually about distinguishing yourself from that community and saying, no, 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 no. I am authority. I am power. I have made it. And again, whether or not that analysis is accurate, I can't speak to it. I can't speak to the Black experience in the United States. But that was the argument that was being made, and I think it's at the very least worth considering.
yeah, no, I would hesitate to speak for Black men, but but being a white woman,
Mm,
but some of that I think does ring true, but
mm.
that doesn't mean it's a insoluble problem. I
No,
mean, I would
I
hate
don't think any problem is insoluble. We just don't have the political will to solve them. And that, yeah,
right, right,
I think that
right,
that brings us sort of back to the migration problem. Like, it's not an insolvable problem. Like, the people in Myanmar want to come, and they want to be safe, and they want to be protected, and then they want to return to their home country once the situation stabilizes. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of avenue for them to do this. Um, and I know that we spoke about Thailand, and there's a. I assume you're aware of this, but I spoke to someone who worked at the U.S. Embassy in Thailand, and he was telling me the story, and human rights advocates and things. They were telling me the stories of the ways that the Burmese people are treated in Thailand, especially by Thai police and Thai immigration authorities, um, up to and including rapes and murders, which
right.
happen pretty much with impunity. Is that situation of Myanmar people living in that border? It's not just the uncertainty that you might be returned to Myanmar and the uncertainty of not having legal status in Thailand, but the fact that you are subjected to random acts of severe violence by authority. Is that being taken into consideration with regards to their requests for help from the United States? Or is it more likely that the United States would look at them and say, well, you're not a priority because you fled the conflict zone and you are currently residing in a peaceful third country?
I don't think immigration thinks they're in a peaceful third world. I'm sorry, a third country. I think, and I think it's more that they want an extremely high level of proof because they don't want there to be an overwhelming amount of, I mean, how many thousands of Burmese are in Mesa? I mean, are in Thailand? They don't want everybody asking for humanitarian parole, right? So they demand a very high level of proof, and people who are, beaten up by the police or raped by the police or put in jail, most of them do not have documentary evidence of that.
Well,
They're not given a discharge page when they leave the jail. They don't have a medical, unless they go to a medical hospital for their care, and they get a discharge note. They're not going to have any medical evidence, and so again, it's just easier for immigration to say, just go try to come through the UN if you don't have anybody here that can petition for you.
but it's like
I
the
can
police
I
do not
say,
leave you a note when they beat you.
I mean, we laugh, but it's horrific, right? These
Yeah.
people go through absolute, and even when I ask people to tell me over Signal or that I need this, they have to trust me and to disclose these things. And how do they know who I am? I mean, at
Yeah.
least if people are here and we can talk face to face, and there are other people who know me who say, yeah, she's a good lawyer, you can trust her. I mean, just to try to establish this kind of rapport over the uh, with such a distance, it's very hard to do. And so between there not being any evidence and people being scared, it's very hard to put together a really detailed case for them, which is apparently what immigration, if they think there's a reason they can deny you, they will deny you. But that's what worries me about the situation in Thailand. It's just pretty scary. I can I say have one digression. I
Hmm.
listened to your show when you were interviewing a woman who was telling you about the Mai Tai clinic,
Yes.
and you were saying, "Oh my God, they see how many people?"
Yeah.
And it's Dr. Cynthia Mong, and I had a client, a Karen woman, coming in for a uh, here in Michigan to do a green card application, and first she wasn't very talkative, and she didn't seem to like me that much, and so it was just kind of yeah yeah yeah. And then I have to ask her where she was born, and she told me, and I said, oh, were you born in the Mayotai clinic? And she said yes. And I said, oh, Dr. Cynthia is one of the big heroes in my life. And she
Yeah.
said, Dr. Mong delivered me.
Wow.
Oh my God, I was so happy. I couldn't believe it. I was like, let me come give you a hug. It was kind of like, it was just a very nice moment where we super connected there, because she knew that I appreciated where she had it come
Mm.
from, and I so appreciated that Dr. Mong had delivered her. So I was happy to hear her discussed on your show.
But I think this is another really serious issue, that the human element of this, right? Like, there's the legal element of it, there's the paperwork, the pathways, and all that sort of jazz. But there's this human component where you these people are vulnerable as anything, and you as a lawyer, which, not the most beloved profession in the world, let's be honest. You have to build rapport and trust with a person who is very aware that this could end with them being returned to a war zone, and who may not speak English confidently. And the image as well that we have of lawyers in the United States is that you're either a high flying lawyer who gets paid, $1,000 an hour, or you're overworked, and you get to see a client for 15 minutes for the first time before their case even goes to trial, and you cobble together some boilerplate, and you're not particularly invested in who that person is. You're just trying to tick off the boxes. So how do you manage to get to that point with a client? Because I assume you don't have a huge amount of time to sit down face to face with a client to build rapport, because you've got cases, you've got papers that need to be filed, you've got court dates. How do you navigate that?
No, I take as much time as I need, because if you don't have that rapport with the client, then you're not going to go anywhere. And actually, I complained about all the paperwork and filling out the forms, but sitting with someone and doing the forms, you get to know the person, and you can ask all kind of extraneous questions on with the excuse that you need it for the form, which I always say, this isn't for the form, I'm just curious. And so you get their story, that way, and then you build some rapport. No, that's very important to me. I mean, that's why I stay doing what I do, is this engagement with the clients. And the other thing is, I don't do any advertising. I get all 100% of my clients through referrals. So somebody has told somebody else in the community, oh, hey, here's my lawyer, she's a nice person, or whatever they
Yeah.
say, right? So somebody has already
Okay.
been referred to me by somebody who's learned to trust me. And so that's how, you stay long enough inside a community, then you establish a level of trust. But if I don't have that rapport with the client, and sometimes you don't get rapport with the client, you just don't, it's not going to work. And so I'm
Okay.
very happy then when they uh the case is over, or they decide they want another. And I always tell them, if you after this point in the case, if we can decide if you want to continue with me, or if you want to find another lawyer, that's fine too, right?
Yeah.
But if you're going to stay with me, we're going to build that, we're going to build that trust. And
And
then you got a friend for life, right?
yes,
And
I
then
mean,
then
yeah, you help them out that way. But like, so here's the other thing: the American legal system famously um, guarantees you, the right to an attorney if you cannot afford one. But these people are not citizens. Are they guaranteed an attorney,
no,
even though
they're
they're five times less likely to succeed without an attorney?
right. And advocates, of course, have been trying to change that, but to no avail. I mean, they don't have enough money to hire enough judges, let alone give everybody an attorney. Uh, some of the pro bono, some of the service agencies try very hard to provide pro bono attorneys, but it's you know shoveling shit against the tide, because there's just overwhelming amounts of people coming into the system who just don't have the money to hire an
Hmm.
attorney. Um, yeah, so
Okay.
you have the right to have an attorney, but not at government expense.
And
So
so, but then attorneys typically, my understanding is you charge by what are called billable hours. So the amount of work that you spend with the client, the amount of time that you're spending in court, and the amount of time that you're spending, filing paperwork and documentation on behalf of the person. Is there an estimate for how many billable hours an individual applicant would expect
I have no
throughout their
idea.
process?
I have
Sorry?
no idea. I don't do
Really?
billable hours.
Oh, you don't do billable hours?
If I can't do you for free, I will charge you an amount for the project,
Oh,
no matter
really?
how long it takes, and how many phone calls and how many texts.
Do you know whether that's a common system among immigration attorneys?
And no, it's not very common.
Okay.
Immigration attorneys have a bad, and I apologize ahead of time to those immigration attorneys I know who are honest and hardworking and over their heads, because there's so much work to do. But the reputation that they have, and certainly I know lawyers who live up to this reputation, is they have a vulnerable clientele, and they just say, okay, I'll do this for you, but it's another 2,000. Okay, yes, I'll go to court, but that's going to be another 3,000.
Jesus.
Um, and so they just, people end up mortgaging their houses, and um, yeah, so that's why they have a bad rap, because I don't know if they do billable hours, or I've heard more. They say, "Oh, you want me to appeal your case to the Board of Immigration Appeals? Well, I charge $15,000 for that."
Is that an
Right?
imaginary number or is that realistic?
No, no. Attorneys will charge that. I had something I usually charge like $800 or $900 for. The lawyer wanted $10,000 for. And so the family said, "Well, we don't have $10,000." I said, "Whoops, sorry, can't take your case."
Jesus Christ.
Now, some lawyers, if they don't want a client, if they don't want to have this client, they'll charge them a horrible amount of money because they know they won't pay it, and then they won't have to worry about it. I tried that one time with somebody who wanted an appeal, and I didn't want to take the case because it was just unappealable. And I took a deep breath and I said, "Well, I charged $3,000 to do the appeal." And dang, they came up with the money, and then I had to do the appeal. And so I don't do that anymore. If I don't want your case, I'll just tell you I'm
Yeah.
too busy. I don't have the time to give it the attention it needs. So I'm
But
not hurting their feelings.
so these are so what you're effectively describing to me is a situation in which a person may even have a legitimate legal case to make, but simply doesn't have the money to navigate the legal system and would have to go to court. Do you have to pay court costs as an individual?
No,
Okay.
there's filing fees for the applications, but to go to court in and of itself, you don't have to pay.
Okay.
You don't have to
Okay.
pay.
But so effectively the situation is that you would be faced with either go to court by yourself and try to defend a reasonable case, but with no legal training and without English as a strong language, and suffer a very high likelihood of failure, or try to pay money that you can't afford to pay for someone
Exactly.
to argue. Like,
Exactly.
that's not
Yeah.
fair.
No, it's not fair. And judges, immigration judges, they don't really want to see a client without a lawyer because they know it's going to be a mess.
Hmm.
Because just representing yourself in small claim, we have something called small claims court here, where you can't have a lawyer. You're just arguing small, simple claims. Um, they really don't want to deal with somebody who doesn't know immigration law, because it's just a big confusing mess, right? And the person is not getting um, it's not being given due process. They're not getting a
Yeah.
fair trial. So the judges will give clients, yes, you have the right to represent yourself, but the judges don't like that. They'll say, "Okay, I'll give you another time. You go away and you find a lawyer, and then you come back." And they'll do that a couple times, but then eventually they'll ask for, who is it that you've asked, right? Are you really making an effort? And at long last, they'll say, "You know what, you're going to go, your case is going to, we're going to determine it on this date, whether you have a lawyer or not. We are going to move forward." um and so you can't ask forever
Hmm.
for more time to get a lawyer. But yeah, then people panic because they don't have money for a lawyer.
But
So
it's
there are
just
a few.
but
Yeah,
that
no, it's not fair. And it's what keeps me honestly from retiring is because there's so many people out there who you could really help without being the greatest lawyer in the world, because their case is pretty simple, or it might take a lot of work, but it's still totally doable. I
Mhm.
mean, but they don't have the money to pay a lawyer to do it. And so when you can help somebody like that and really change their life, that's a neat thing to do.
Okay, so and I don't mean to sort of dismiss the years of education that you put in, but as a blunt question, what would it actually take? Like, how much actual training and skill would it take to take a functional, intelligent person and turn them into someone who can put forth a reasonable, cogent legal argument for why a person should not leave?
You mean not a lawyer, but a layperson who wants to do this? I mean,
Yeah,
I could teach somebody how to do it. Well, I never had that question
I know,
asked of
but
me,
yeah, but let's say I want to represent myself pro se, and you
and
say
I'm
that's
gonna
a
men-
clearly idiotic idea. Don't do that, and I say no, I want to do it anyway.
and
how,
I'm gonna
how how
and
long
I'm
is
gonna
our montage going to be? Our training montage?
well, you're a smart guy, so I could probably mentor you through it in a few months. But you have
Okay,
to
we're not talking
understand.
hours here. It's
No,
months. Okay.
well, depend. Yeah, maybe it's hours. If it's depend. I mean, I've certainly told people how to do their case themselves, but
Okay.
if it's a case where you have to get up on the stand and testify, how the hell do you examine yourself,
Yeah.
right? It's just, yeah,
By the way, can that be done?
uh, yeah. The judge kind of steps in to help, but
Oh, okay.
the prosecutor's going to make mincemeat out of you, right? Fucking mincemeat out of you if you're not a lawyer and you're up there on the stand and you're trying to be your own lawyer. I mean, it's just a it's just a painful situation, and the judges don't want to do it, and the prosecutors, if they've got half a kindly gene in their body, don't want to do it either, right? Um, so
But is it a question of not understanding the law, or is it a question of not being able to play the courtroom game?
well, both. I mean, you
Okay.
have to, although the judge will guide you through it, but I keep coming back to the word Byzantine and Kafka, and then Kafkaesque
Yeah.
also, it works here too. But if you don't know the case law that's been leading up to the state that you're in, you don't know the current asylum laws, you don't know the difference between an economic migrant and persecution, you don't know how to present your evidence correctly,
Hmm.
you don't have nobody's told you you need documentation from your home country, which can be very difficult to get
Hmm.
because most people don't leave the country they have with all the documentation they need for an asylum claim, right? So you have to try to get it from your home country. You don't know how to present it to the court. You don't know how to do any of that. I mean, you're not going to win your case.
Okay. So a lot of that is not about going into the courtroom and being an amazing sort of Perry Mason lawyer. It's about knowing how to do all the preparatory work before you step into the courtroom, knowing what you're going to present as evidence, having the documentation on hand, clearing up exactly what points you do and do not want to bring up. Like it seems it's more about everything that happens before you walk in the courtroom.
Yeah, yes, it's preparation. I mean, it's preparation. I mean, I spend a lot of time prepping my clients for their for the trial, the hearing, the final hearing. So I will make up a whole list of questions that I want to ask, and then I share it with the client, and then they add other ones that they think I've missed, and then we go over them and until I until they know that these are things that I'm going to ask them. But and then I try to tell them, well, here's what, okay, now it's the prosecutor's turn to cross-examine you, and here's what I think the prosecutor's going to ask you, right? And
Mm,
so then I ask all those hard ass nasty questions that the prosecutor's going to ask, and then the judge can ask questions too, and so there's a, because I want the client to know what it is that's going to be, what's going to be important, what's going to be of value, what the judge is going to be looking for in their story, right? So
yeah.
it's how to present it, because credibility is um, such a huge factor in winning in your case.
Yeah.
Um, I had a case once where it was a young Congolese woman, and the judge liked her, and it had a long tortured history, which I won't go into. But the crux of this was she was testifying that she'd gotten, uh, she was in she was in the hospital, and she was in the hospital because after she'd been beaten up, and the judge says, "Well, do you have any photos of this in the hospital?" And she said, "Well, yes, I do." And my jaw dropped, and the judge said, "Well, did you ever give them to your attorney?" And she said, "No." And he said, "Well, do you have them?" She said, "Oh, yeah, they're in my purse." And
Mm.
so he said, "Well, go get them," which is totally, you're supposed to submit all your evidence
Yeah.
15 days ahead of time and all this. But he let her go to the person. She took out these pictures, and we carried on. And then at the end, he said, "Okay, I'm going to give you asylum." I wasn't going to, but those pictures kind of sold me on your
Wow.
case. I'm going to give you. So you never know what's going to happen, and you never know what a client is going to take into the courtroom that they haven't told you about. um, but that's why you have to prepare, and of course that taught me to always ask, "Do you have any photographs? Do you have these photos with you?" Right?
Mm.
And so, yeah, it's just a whole. And plus you have to know it very helpful to know the personality of the judge, and the person, and to know the prosecutor. Sometimes you don't have a choice in that. It's a brand new judge or a brand new prosecutor. But
Mm.
if you've developed a kind of a relationship with the judge, because some of the judges I've been in front of for years now, right? Then you kind of know, you can kind of read them, right? You kind of know what they're looking for. You can look at their responses. A client isn't going to see any of that, right?
Yeah.
Or you have a prosecutor that's a real asshole, right? A real
Hmm.
hard ass. Or they're kind of a softie, if you can work on that side. I mean, all that a lawyer brings to the courtroom without even realizing they're bringing it, right? But all the experience, there's no way the client themselves has any clue of any of that, all that nonverbal stuff that's going on.
Yeah. I mean, the real subtleties of even when you have a jury trial, which obviously is not the concern with you, but the way that a lawyer is able to see the jury and is able to
Right,
see whether the jury is responding positively or
right,
negatively to something, which yeah, obviously like a layman wouldn't because
right,
you're not
right,
trained for that.
right, right, right. And yeah, and really, I don't think lawyers even think of that as being trained for it. It's just because they do it over and over and over that it becomes sixth sense,
Mm.
right? They can tell they can tell if a juror is leaning one way or the other, just like I can tell if the judge is um, going to look on this case favorably. And you know how to slant the story if you know what judge you have. We had a judge who was married to an ex-cop. Well, you knew damn well you better not have your client say have any run-ins with the cops, or if their crime had anything to do with the cop, you had to be able to present it in a way that didn't disrespect cops, right?
Mm.
Like, of course the judge isn't supposed to take that into consideration, but knowing a judge's personal story can help.
And how much like how far ahead of time do you know who the judge is going to be?
uh Years.
Really?
Yeah,
So you don't
because
just show up to court one day and the clerk says, "Oh, your judge today is
no,
going to
no,
be
no,
this
no,
person."
no, 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 you're assigned a judge, and with some with 99% of the time that will be the judge that will take the case all the way through. So yes, when you're preparing your case, you will know what judge is going to hear it. Now that can change for various reasons, right? But
Mm.
not very not very often. You can't. The prosecutors change, the trial attorneys change, but not the judge.
Okay. Now, I don't have a convenient segue here, unfortunately, but I really do want to take it all the way back and just discuss with you again the way you got into this, because it was such a hearing you discuss your career trajectory was such a head spin for me. So can you take us all the way back to when you started working in a prison and how that came to be?
How I started working in a prison. Okay, well, when I got out of law school, my first job as a lawyer was with a federally mandated state agency who whose job was to advocate for disability rights. And this was back in the this was in the 90s. And so because I had really gotten interested in going to law school because of my work with kids in special education, that was kind of my route into law school. So then my first job was with working advocating for people with disabilities, and many of them were children, but for some reason, and I can't remember now why, I started getting prisoners writing asking for help. Usually what happens is, one guy finds you, or one woman, and then they say, oh, here, I found this program, they'll help you. So I started getting letters from prisoners who needed help. Oh, like a blind prisoner was not able to get access to free Braille material, which the Library of Congress, you can get free Braille material if you're blind. It doesn't matter whether you're in prison or not. Or a prisoner's wheelchair was falling apart, but the prison would say, oh, you're just faking. You don't really need a wheelchair anyway, so we're not going to go out and buy you a new one. Or deaf. So usually there's a series of things that you have to go through certain programs so you can be eligible for parole. Well, if you're deaf and they didn't have sign language interpretation, how were you ever going to take those classes, right?
Isn't that
Um,
federally guaranteed, by the way? Like language interpretation is guaranteed by law, no?
but not in prison, my friend.
Really?
Right? Nothing. No, nothing is guaranteed in prison, but your time, but your bit that you got to get through. Well, I mean, of course, we would go in and say, this is the law that disabled people have rights even if they're in prison. So yes, you have to do this for them, but you would have to fight for them, and the prison isn't going to um, shell out money for things if they don't feel they have to, because nobody's asking them to do it, right?
Do you
Um,
recall, by the way, whether this was a government run prison or whether this was a private prison?
no, no, it was a state prison, state of Michigan.
And even so, they were very concerned about not spending money on protecting the constitutional rights of
Even
their people.
so, it's, even so, especially
Really?
as we speak, the Michigan, as I just read in the news, I don't have personal knowledge of it,
Mm.
but the correctional officers are all saying, "Oh my God, you have to hire more staff. We're so underworked. We're double shifted. This is a dangerous situation." I mean, yeah, yeah, of course they didn't want to spend money on them.
That part doesn't shock me. I do follow quite a few former prisoners, and one of the very consistent things that comes up among and these are people who do not have love for prison guards. And one of the consistent things is they're saying you have to increase salaries for prison guards because the reason they are so corrupt is because they're not being paid enough to survive. And that's why you can always get a prison guard to come bring you drugs. You can always get a prison guard to look the other way while you stab someone. You know, you need to do that. And Larry Lawton will point out, if you don't have enough guards on duty, they can just say, you know what, we're just going to lock down the prison. Nobody leaves their cells for the next 3 days, which is inhumane. But their argument is, well, we don't have the staff, and therefore it's not safe to let you out, and therefore you can just rot in your cell. So that I'm not surprised by. That seems to be very pervasive. And this is across the entire country, whether it's Florida, whether it's Arkansas, whether it's Texas, whether it's Virginia. Like, I'm hearing the same thing across the board.
Well, yeah, but of course we incarcerate on a percentage level, I think, highest in the world. And which is why I have great sympathy with the abolitionist movement, which says, break down the walls, because which is a whole different topic. But
not
yeah,
entirely different, because the 13th Amendment, if I remember correctly, carved out an exception for the prison system to continue the practice of slavery.
right, and that's still an ongoing issue because the prison workers are paid like I don't know, a quarter an hour or something, right? I mean, it is a slavery system, and there are advocates working to try to change that as well. But of course, that's a huge that's a huge problem. I mean, that's kind of like we were talking about the refugees. I mean, there's still slave labor. They're in the prisons and they're in the um, slaughterhouses, right?
Or on the fields.
Yes, they're in the fields picking our food. So I started so then I got more and more, my client load became mostly prisoners, and then I was working through a very small. I think there's a director who was a lawyer and another lawyer. Um, they were prosecuting a conditions of confinement case on behalf of prisoners of the State Department of Corrections, and they had a class action lawsuit against the state on behalf of all these prisoners. And the judge in the case ruled that the law firm should have a presence in the prison, in a prison in the system. And so um, when I when there was an opening in that law firm, like the other lawyer left, uh, the staff knew me as somebody that they had been talking to about helping people with disabilities, and so I went and interviewed for the job, and I got it, and that was it was on the yard of a prison in Jackson, Michigan, and it was a double wide, and there were one, two, three or four civilian people, and the rest were prisoners. So all our legal assistants and people who helped answer the letters and put together the documentation for the case, they were all prisoners from that prison. Most of them, not all of them, but many of them were lifers. Um, and that was very interesting. Um,
Were you afraid, by the way, working in those conditions?
no.
Really? I just find that so interesting. Like, so you're working with the prisoners, correct? Like, there's nothing separating you from the prisoners.
No. And one of the guys had committed some horrible murders when he was a teenager, and he had spent his life in there, and he was one of the smartest guys there, and had taught himself how to work on the computer. He was finally paroled a couple years ago and moved to a city right next to me, actually a city where my office is. And I've been helping him out, and we've been friends ever since, right? And he's out in the world. So Um, yeah, no, I was actually. You're more afraid of the guards. You're not
Really?
afraid of. You're not afraid of the. Well, I mean, the inmates are glad you're there. They're so pleased, right? Oh my God, we've got lawyers. We can talk to them every day, all day.
Okay.
Yeah, no, when you cross the yard to go, I think the vending machines, you had to cross the yard to go to another into another building to get to the vending machines, and of course guys, might approach you, but always with great respect, right? um
Okay. So it's not that sexual harassment that you would sort of picture from movies and so on.
no, 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 no. I mean, no. The only time I ever felt sexually harassed was when I was in the parking lot out in front of a huge prison. It happened to be, we called it behind the walls. It was like a big prison, and I
Mm.
was, and there were some guys yelling down from the windows,
Yeah.
and but that was the only, um, but that was the only, uh, you know, when I asked the guys that I met, because guys would come in to visit, prisoners would come in on the pretext that they needed to talk to a lawyer about something. And I would try to ask people, what could the world have done differently for you so that you wouldn't have ended up in here?
Mm.
And I never got an answer other than if I'd had somebody who gave a shit about me,
Mm.
which broke my heart, right? I mean, some of them had done bad things, some of them had sold drugs, some of them had done violent crimes, right? We didn't, um, but it's people that make the difference in your life, right? People didn't have
Yeah.
the chance that other people had. People didn't have somebody to reach down and say, "Come on, I'll help you," right? I'll
Mm.
help you when you need help. But anyway, so a couple of the prisoners were from other countries, one from Cuba and one from Guatemala, and they introduced me to the idea of um, immigration detainers, and I had to confess that I didn't know what that was. And what it was immigration putting a hold on you so that if you got out on parole or you got out because you'd done your time, you would be picked up and taken into ICE custody. Um, and then it would be determined if you were going to be ordered deported or not. And usually, if you'd been in prison for more than 1 year, you would be considered, in immigration parlance anyway, an aggravated felon, and there wasn't much hope for you. You were going to be deported, right?
Okay.
Um, and so, unless you were from a country, so this was my actual baptism in immigration law, unless you were from a country that wouldn't take you back. And if they wouldn't take you back for a long time in this country, you could just be detained forever in immigration detention. And some some jurisdictions in the United States said that was illegal, unconstitutional, and some circuits said no, that's okay. You can keep people in there forever. Um, and finally, the Supreme Court decided in 2001 that it was unconstitutional for indefinite detention, and you had to be reviewed every 6 months to see whether you could be let out. And you because you could not, it was unconstitutional to be held in there forever. And
Mm.
so the first things I ever did for immigration were actually not in immigration court, they were in federal court. And I would file a writ of habeas corpus saying, this Cuban guy, Castro's never going to take him back, or Somalis at the time. Nobody was deporting to Somalia. It was too dangerous to deport people to Somalia. Now there's, a different list of countries. But so you go in front of the federal judge and say, this is indefinite detention is unconstitutional. And then they would be let out. So that was very satisfying, because you never lose those, because the law is on your side. And so from then I went into, after I left that law firm, because I was taking care of my mother who was dying, I just started my own business. And then I started taking, said, I want to do immigration. That's what I want to do.
Wow.
And that was how I started.
I don't know, it's just kind of wild for me. I mean, I can sort of imagine why you would want to do that, like going from advocacy for, disabled people whose rights are being trampled, to advocacy for people who are, I don't want to, diminish the suffering of the disabled population, but probably in a legal sense even more vulnerable, because
Right.
they're not even citizens and they're not granted a
Right.
lot of those constitutional protections. It makes a lot of sense, but it's just such an interesting trajectory to go on. And I know that you personally, you have had a focus on those countries that seem to be in the most strife. I know you have a lot of Congolese clients. I know you also have quite a lot of Haitian connection. Was that where did your Haitian connection start? Was that with the natural disasters in Haiti, or was that because of the regime in Haiti?
Well, actually, it's because I decided I wanted to adopt, and you know, that's another long story. But I ended up adopting two teenage boys from an orphanage in Haiti, and so I became obviously extremely interested in Haiti.
Yeah.
And then that grew into getting involved with the Haitian community here, and then trying to because now Haitians are also TPS, and they have asylum claims. I will inject that nothing hurts my heart more than the hatred that this country has shown toward Haitians, and this latest iteration of that with the
Presidential debate.
yeah, and this whole picture of Haitian, it used to be, well, Haitians brought AIDS, and now it's, well, Haitians eat pets. And I'm like, leave these people alone. They're the hardest working people in the world, and it's just unbelievable to me. I can't express it other than to say it just hurts my heart, because it's unbelievable to me how we have never, ever, ever forgiven the Haitian people for being the first slave colony to throw off the oppressor. We have never
Mm-hmm.
forgiven them for that. And America's hated them since then, because they were deathly afraid that they were going to convince the slaves in America to do the same thing.
Oh,
Right?
really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
when you read
I knew the
history.
French haven't forgiven them, which is why Haitian national debt is based on reparations for the
Yes,
lost value of the slaves.
yeah, Haitians have to pay reparations to France. I
Yes.
mean, is that a kick in the ass or what? I mean, that is so absurd. That is so absurd.
It
I
is
mean,
comical that France has managed to get away with that for 2 centuries.
I know, I know, I know. Yeah. So
And then when was the president? Like they had a president in Haiti who decided to not pay the debt, and then middle, he found himself on a French military transport, dropped off in the Central African Republic to live out the rest of his life in exile.
that was Aristide.
Oh God! Like
Yeah.
again, the fact that the French could pull that off and the international community didn't bat an eyelid.
Well, it makes sense to white people. It makes sense to oppressors. It makes sense to colonialists, right? Well, of course they should pay us reparations because look at all that sugarcane money we're not getting
Mm,
now, right? It makes
yeah.
sense to them.
Yeah, I mean, it made sense back then, but I mean, it's the 21st century. We should probably re-examine 17th or 18th century logic and
I
19th
don't
century
think.
logic.
I think Haiti um, is not even in Macron's vision at all, right?
No.
Macron has other things to worry about, and sending Kenyan. Here's the way we solve the problem in Haiti: we send Kenyan policemen there. I mean, really? As you look at the history of what the Kenyan police do to Kenyans, and we're going to send them to Haiti. There's no common language, right?
Yeah, that's
Kenyans
what
are
I was going
not
to. Kenya was British colonized, and Haiti was French. That
right,
doesn't even.
right. And no, they don't. Well, of course, they don't speak Creole, but they don't even speak French, and the Haitians don't speak just Swahili.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like, what was anybody thinking? Is it like anybody could have said? And the poor Haitians, they'd interview some poor schmuck on the street and say, "Well, what do you think of the Kenyan police?" And they'd say, "Well, we need help. If they could do something, oh,
just not this.
okay, yeah, try." But it's like you knew from day one that was going to be an utter disaster.
I think
But
Haiti is a disaster. Like Haiti feels like the place where everyone tries out their bad ideas.
yeah,
It's like I'm a fan of Bill Clinton. I thought his presidency was um, significantly better than the one that followed, but he messed up bad in Haiti. Like he destroyed and it makes sense when you think about it. It's like, oh, if you keep shipping free food, then the people who are trying to produce food and sell it for a profit have no way to compete in that market. So you've just killed off the native
there's
industry.
also you.
But yeah, it's just you look at Haiti, like so many policies that people seem to want to enact. It's like, oh, we can fix Haiti, and it's like you have a bad idea. You had maybe like good intentions, but you didn't sit down with pen and paper and work this one out. But you
Well,
still dumped it on Haiti.
nobody ever went and talked to the Haitians and asked what they wanted.
Yeah,
Right? It's always imposed. How can you be a Clinton fan? Look what he did to Rwanda. My God, the guy has a history of. Well, I'm sorry, all those people. Years later, he apologized. Gosh, maybe I didn't move quickly enough. I was like, hello, how many people
yeah, but
were
you
murdered?
have to remember, I was born in 1989, so my political awakening was George Bush.
Okay.
So I was like, oh, Clinton seems so much cooler than that guy.
Well, yeah, but it was a low bar, right?
I mean, yeah, internationally, yeah, because I think Clinton, I believe there was pretty strong economic growth under Clinton domestically in the U.S. Um,
True, true.
but as for the international, because I think the U.S. response to the Bosnian genocide also fell on Clinton's watch,
Yes, it did.
which was lacking would be a word that comes to mind for that one. I think NATO
Yeah,
really kind of dropped the ball on that one, to be honest.
dropping the bombs, dropping the
While
bombs.
also dropping the bombs, yeah. Pretty abysmal. Then again, I don't know. I don't want to sort of just pile more trash onto the US because that's a very popular thing for non-US people to do. But yeah, a lot of bad presidential policies and decisions um, coming out of the US in the last century.
You can pile on because we don't let any of it touch us. We don't care what y'all say. We're right because we're Americans, right?
Yeah, that is the true way to do things. And it's okay. This is nothing to do with immigration. This is just a side thing. It just bothers me that American foreign policy seems to be, let's have great intentions and let's start with gusto and then just peter out. It's very much Eddie Izzard does a bit on the U.S. anthem. Like, nobody seems to know the words in the middle of the anthem. You start really strong, you end really strong, and the middle's just sort of, you move your lips to the rhythm of the music. And it feels kind of like that. Like, yes, like go into Vietnam and go into Afghanistan and go into all these places. It's like, okay, cool. So now that the action movie stuff is done, and you can maybe spend some time building infrastructure and roads and schools and hospitals and internet, and giving people, scholarships to come study in the United States so they can upskill, and all of a sudden it's crickets chirping in the background. And I'm like, hearts and
Well, and
minds. This is how you do hearts and minds, not
yeah,
not with napalm.
well, and then screwing the people when it's all over.
Yes.
Today I've been trying to help an agency to to help an Afghan person who did manage to get on one of the flights out,
Mm,
but um, in the United States is supposed to be helping him, but the paperwork falls through. It takes months and months and months and months, and these guys are just languishing.
yeah.
And of course they had to get out or they would be killed by the Taliban. But we take our own sweet. We say we're going to do all these wonderful things, but it's the people like in the agencies who are trying to help them that are caught
Mm,
trying to sweep up the mistakes and try to get stuff pushed through. And God forbid, now this guy's family made it with him. I have Afghan clients whose wife and kids are still back in Afghanistan. We can't fucking get them out
mm,
because there's no embassy, right?
mm.
So the word is, well, try to get them to Qatar, and they can fly out of Qatar. Okay, fine. That's easy to do. So
Because what
one,
I think the Americans don't understand the impact that Americana has. Because immediately after the coup, I had so many of my students and people that I knew in Myanmar contacting me, going like, "Oh, like, we're fighting for democracy. So are the Americans gonna, like, deploy soon? Like, what's gonna happen? Are they just gonna assassinate me online, or is it gonna be like a landing, at the beaches sort of deal?" And I'm like, the Americans
oh,
don't know where you are on a map, man. Like, they don't care, and they
that
genuinely thought they were gonna come in.
or I remember seeing the signs that said R2P,
Yes,
right?
yes.
United Nations R2P. How many people? It just broke my heart because they were so naive in thinking. And I guess I was a little naive myself. I thought we would help, but we haven't helped. We don't need, there's not even much airtime given to Myanmar. We are pushed so far down the
Mm,
um, scale now. You're lucky if you get a word or two from the um, High Commissioner for Human Rights, right? Um, that's very, but that, yes, that breaks my heart. They said the United States is going to come. Yeah, right. Then this is the United Nations. Just those solitary signs that said R2P.
yeah.
I was like, oh please, oh please.
And
It's
I
sad.
spoke to the guy. I spoke to the UN commissioner in Myanmar. We did an interview with him recently, and he actually he was expelled from Myanmar as persona non grata for delivering a speech, um, not even on behalf of the United Nations, on behalf of himself, but as, a United Nations representative, calling out the military for their treatment during the Saffron Revolution. And I was really frustrated because he was saying, like, privately, all these people from the United Nations were contacting him and saying, wow, like, we're so happy you did that. We're so proud to be, diplomats, and, like what you said and what you did and standing up for these principles was so great. And it's like, that's cool and all, but none of those people agreed ahead of time to give him permission to make that speech. He just had to go out and do it because nobody wants to rock the boat. Nobody wants to upset anyone. And that's all these international organizations and all the big fish. They talk a big game, but when it comes crunch time, like, oh, but no, our stakeholders, our interests, our strategic allies, our this, our that, or whatever else, and people are dying. So yeah, really sort of eye-opening experience there. But that's the problem, is that everyone talks a good game and they don't follow up on it. So then, for the people themselves, for the Myanmar people, like circling back to our sort of core thesis here, do you have any insight into like what the Myanmar people should be trying to do if they are looking at their situation and they're feeling desperation, going like, okay, this war is not going to magically end anytime soon. My home is not safe. I am actually at risk here. I could be taken out by a bullet. I could be taken out by a bombing. You're right. Urban guerrillas are operating in Yangon. There are bombing campaigns, like as in terrorism-style bombing campaigns in Yangon at the moment. People are legitimately afraid for their lives. It's not an act. What would you recommend to these people to start doing and to sort of maximize their chances of being able to make it out?
Pray.
Good God.
I don't have an answer. If they have no family here in the United States, if they cannot get a student visa, if they don't have enough documentation to ask for humanitarian parole, they're not going to come. They're not going to come.
That's
Man, if I had a way
bleak.
to bring, if I had a bleak, yeah, absolutely, it's bleak. If I had a way to bring people here from Burma, I'd be doing it.
So it's not a matter of like, hey guys, like start taking photographs and make sure that you have documentary evidence of what your life is like, and
They cannot take photographs because if their phones get seized,
yeah,
they're in deep shit.
yeah,
So people wipe their phones, people wipe their WhatsApp.
yeah.
People, I can't get people to write letters of evidence. They can't get me evidence. They can't get me testimony because how are they going to get it to me? Right? People can't even get back in the village to get any kind of household registry or birth certificate if they have one. No, almost every day am talking to somebody trying to see how they can get here. But once they get here, I can help them. I can file an asylum claim for them. But I cannot get them here.
And there's no special program. It's not likely that there'll be a special program to create an avenue for Burmese people.
No.
No.
No, I mean, humanitarian parole program is the closest that comes to it. And again, I have not had good luck with that, although other attorneys may have. I haven't found one yet, but it's very difficult to get those.
Because you've said that Haiti and Venezuela and Ukraine and Afghanistan have had special programs implemented.
Yeah, but this country, for whatever reason, doesn't care about Myanmar. They just don't care. Jesus. If they did, the embassy would be a lot freer with handing out visas, don't you think?
So it really feels like the chips are just stacked against them then. That the system is set up so that you could apply for asylum because you have very good, very legitimate reasons to want asylum if you could get to the United States, but we will do everything we can to prevent you getting to the United States.
Yes, which is so bizarre.
Mm,
Once you get here, we can construct a pretty strong case for you, even with all the difficulty of, because I can tell that in the asylum application we can say, no, I don't have evidence of this because of course I had to wipe my phone, right?
mm,
Um, but you and in fact, if you file for an asylum application online, which you can do now, they ask your permission for them to figure out your location, because if your location is outside the United States, you cannot apply.
Jesus. I mean, it's like
Yeah,
putting an obstacle course at the front of the physiotherapy ward. It's like,
yeah.
why? Why would you do this?
Well, because we don't, because I, yeah, I don't know why.
So the solution
Because
is seems to be more political. It's not about anything the refugees could be doing. It's about getting some actual action within the establishment within the United States to change the policies.
and do you see that? I don't see that. I don't see that. I mean, Obama and Biden deport people hand over fist. We were so nervous and worried about Trump. Now he's saying he's going to deport millions of people. But I
Mhm.
mean, Obama was a great person to deport people.
Yeah,
So there is no. That's again. I go back to: have you heard the politicians talk about the poor, the homeless, the undocumented, the people trying to get in for asylum? There's no compassion for them. We're just too interested in making money for corporations. It's the corporations that get the attention and the compassion, not people.
I mean it's a truth, and like we know it's true, but it's just so depressing to hear. Like, I'm trying to imagine like what it would be like, and keep going back to that segment that I saw, watching John Oliver with that lawyer explaining to a bunch of Mexicans, going like, guys, even if you go back to Mexico and you're assassinated by the cartel, even that would not necessarily have been enough evidence to get you into America if the cartel's not nice enough to leave a note saying we did it. Like the
You know,
burden is beyond impossible.
I had a client who I started representing in while he was already in immigration detention. It's a county jail, and I used to go in there once a week and give know your rights presentations, is what they were called.
Mm,
And he's a young man from Honduras. He's very, very handsome guy. Handsome guy. Big head of curly hair. And he had been a gang member, and he had gang tattoos,
yeah,
and he was being deported back to Honduras. And my argument to the judge was he's going to be killed,
yeah,
because at that time, that it was the vigilantes were going around killing gang members. Um, and I said these tattoos are going to get him killed. And the prosecutor thought that was funny and said, "Well, he can just wear long sleeve shirts,
Jesus Christ.
um, cover up his tattoos." Well, I lost that case, and he got deported. And a couple months later, he went in the police station, and I don't think we knew, the people who told me, I don't think we knew why he entered the police station, but when he left, he was followed and shot and killed. Um,
I just wonder, like, did did the prosecutor feel any remorse after that?
he wouldn't give a shit.
Jesus
He
Christ.
wouldn't give a shit. He would say, he was a gang member. They're just. I
So
mean,
they're
I don't.
fine with sending people off to die.
Well, I don't want to say every prosecutor is fine doing that,
Mm,
because there are some kind-hearted, although it kills me to say that, kind-hearted prosecutors, because they're really not kind-hearted, but they're doing their job, and I think they truly believe this person committed a crime, or this person was here undocumented, and that's the law. And the law says you have to go back to your country, right? And what happens to you when you go back to your country? Well, you should have thought of that before you got your tattoos, right? You should have thought
Mm.
of that before you joined the gang. You should have thought of that. I don't know how many times I've heard one judge say that. Well, you should have thought about that before you robbed the bank, or whatever, right? Like, people don't mess up. You know, clients are always in the jails always used to complain to me, this is double jeopardy,
Mm.
right? They knew enough law to get them in trouble, right? So they said, we already been convicted of our crime, we did our time, and now we're arrested again. And I said, yep, you're right. That's the way the system works. You broke a criminal law, and by doing that you broke an immigration law, and that's a new law that you broke, and that's what you're being punished for.
But
And yes, the prosecutor will say that's the way the law is, so you are going back.
and I know that you understand this, but it's just this whole like, oh, you should have thought of that. You should have thought of, like, man, shut up. Like, it doesn't it doesn't work that way. Like, when you talk to people who have been in gangs, right? Like, I've never been in a gang, but I've done some shady things, and you I've done some shady things that could get me in prison for a long time. And the thing is, a lot of it's not about you're sitting around going, yes, I would like to join this criminal enterprise. That sounds like a really good idea. More often than not, it's these are the people who exist in my environment who seem to be a source of safety, who seem to
Yes.
be a source of
A
opportunity.
yes, a
And it,
surrogate family for
yeah,
them. That's support. Yeah.
and that's what you got. And it's like, well, especially in places like Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, like these places, death squad is not an expression, it's a
Right.
fact. And
Right.
so when the government is just the biggest gang in town, getting into a gang could literally be a way for you to protect your community from arbitrary, murder and rape and pillage and all these terrible things that government forces would do. And then to have those people who made the best possible decision that they could have made in the worst possible circumstance judged by someone who's never been there, saying, oh, you should have thought of that. It's like, well, I didn't exactly have time to think. Bullets were flying. Like, you know, you try thinking under that pressure. It's just so arrogant.
Well, and yeah, and that's a whole other brings up a whole other question of how many times I tell a client, okay, you're talking to a judge who has never been in Rwanda, who
Mm,
has never been in Kenya, and who's never been in Sudan, never been in Burma, um, and you have to present the story so that they have some understanding of what it was like, because we don't know. That's why I'm so happy to get my hands on a client,
mm,
because from any country, because I can ask them questions about what is it really like?
yeah.
Tell me, what do you think is going to happen? What really goes on? Yes, you're in a totally other country where people have never been in your country, and you're trying to explain to them how things are on the ground, and the prosecutor will say, like, well, don't you know that in Sudan there's a law, and then they'll give you the number of the law. It was passed in 2010, and it absolutely prohibits the police from breaking your knees when they arrest you. And
Oh, how
it's like,
convenient.
right. Well, I mean, that's the law, but that's not the way it is in reality. But it's so you have to have testimony or witnesses or something to argue against that, to argue against all that the prosecutor easily can bring up, saying, well, here's what your constitution says, here's what your laws say, right? Here's the president gave a speech, and here's what he said. And so that's an extra barrier an extra burden for a client and the attorney to try to present to the court.
But that's got to be facetious. I mean, there are laws in the United States, and we watched George Floyd be murdered by
Right,
uniformed police. We watched it happen.
right,
Like, and we know it's a crime because the guy was sentenced. Like,
right.
so the idea that the existence of a law preventing police brutality would preclude police brutality, surely in the United States nobody takes that line of argument seriously.
I think the advent of cell phones has helped a great deal, right? Because you can you can document things that before were not documented, right? The
Mm,
problem is in countries like Burma where or other countries, your phone just gets seized and that's the end of
yeah.
that, right?
Or you
You
get
don't
shot
get,
for having a phone.
yeah, yeah,
Seen that happen as well. It's horrific, and of course the military have been very effective by cutting off internet and electricity to the border regions. They're not able to take photographs because every camera is electronic these days,
yeah,
and you can't
yeah.
charge them. There's no battery. Um, so it
When it's over, you're down to, um, and I'm sure it's happening now as well, but it's down to people talking to people. It's individual testimonies and individual interviews,
yeah,
right? And when you get, so many interviews that say the same thing, this is what happened. I mean, I think there will be accountability. Yeah, I guess I should say I hope there will be accountability for all the uh, horrific things going on in Burma, but it's just not going to be until it's over.
exactly. And although we've been speaking for a while, as the two of us are very wont to do, and talking to you is, it's always an interesting experience for me. I thoroughly enjoy it, and I thoroughly enjoy our conversations, even though they are in every instance deeply distressing and disturbing, um, because the state of the world is not good and has not been good for a very, very, very long time, unfortunately. But it's still, I always find it fascinating, and I always find it very uplifting to know that there are at least some people within the system who are finding solutions and who are trying their best to get the best possible outcome.
What leaps immediately to mind is if everybody just did something, um, if everybody could just contribute in whatever way they felt they could. Money is good, that's fine, but it, we have to do more than that. We have to rise above um, the hatred that is so pervasive today, and we have to we have to display in everything we do every day that love wins and hope is a strategy, right? Hope wins, and we can change things, but we have to do it together, and we have to do it, I think, in with loving compassion, and we just have to do it. We can't become so self-absorbed and so worried about our own life that we can't stand up and reach out, to somebody else. So I guess that's my closing statement.
သဘာဝကိုပုံတင်ပြတာထီကယုံကလေးများလို့လူတွေ့ရင်မူကားနှဲ့ကရိမ့်မဲ့ခင်ပြူသဘာဝကိုပုံတင်ပြတာထီကယုံကလေးများလို့လူတွေ့ရင်မူကားနှဲ့ကရိမ့်မဲ့ခင်ပြူခင်ကိုချစ်ကြိုးတွေတွေ့ကရစ်ခါမြစ်တာစင်နဲ့ဆိုကြောင်းကျင်သလိုကြားကျင်သလိုမစိမ့်ပင်ကြီးရဲ့မူကားပုံ An Tong Mu Po, Yung No Mu Ne Piu, Pan Wen Yu Ha Let's say to Yin Yo Ma So Ya Tru. An Tong Mu Po, Yung No Mu Ne Piu, Pan Wen Yu Ha Let's say to Yin Yo Ma So Ya Tru.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode. As regular listeners are aware, we often remind our audience about our nonprofit mission, Better Burma, at the end of a show. Truth be told, fundraising is hard work, and I can personally attest to the fact that it's really no fun to keep asking for contributions. Yet, the situation on the ground now in Myanmar is so distressing that we continue to do so on behalf of the Burmese people. What is most helpful at this time are recurring donations, which help alleviate both the stress and time involved in fundraising. If you are able to pledge a certain amount per month, our team can plan around having at least a consistent minimum amount to work within each month. If you would like to join in our mission to support those in Myanmar who are being impacted by the military coup, we welcome your contribution in any form, currency, or transfer method. Your donation will go on to support a wide range of humanitarian and media missions, aiding those local communities who need it most. Donations are directed to such causes as the Civil Disobedience Movement, CDM, families of deceased victims, internally displaced person IDP camps, food for impoverished communities, military defection campaigns, undercover journalists, refugee camps, monasteries and nunneries, education initiatives, the purchasing of protective equipment and medical supplies, COVID relief, and more. We also make sure that our donation fund supports a diverse range of religious and ethnic groups across the country. We invite you to visit our website to learn more about past projects, as well as upcoming needs. You can give a general donation or earmark your contribution to a specific activity or project you would like to support, perhaps even something you heard about in this very episode. All of this humanitarian work is carried out by our nonprofit mission, Better Burma. Any donation you give on our Insight Myanmar website is directed towards this fund. Alternatively, you can also visit the Better Burma website, betterburma.org, and donate directly there. In either case, your donation goes to the same cause, and both websites accept credit card. You can also give via PayPal by going to paypal.me/betterburma. Additionally, we can take donations through Patreon, Venmo, GoFundMe, and Cash App. Simply search Better Burma on each platform and you'll find our account. You can also visit either website for specific links to these respective accounts or email us at info@betterburma.org. That's Better Burma, one word, spelled BETTERBURMA.org. If you would like to give in another way, please contact us. We also invite you to check out our range of handicrafts that are sourced from vulnerable artisan communities across Myanmar, available at alokacrafts.com. Any purchase will not only support these artisan communities, but also our nonprofit's wider mission. That's Aloka Crafts, spelled ALOKACRAFTS, one word, alokacrafts.com. Thank you so much for your kind consideration and support.
Otaba Yarananga Unyana Dadu Yadana Ganizadamana, Vigara Besayana, Besayo. Oba Yarananda Dayananga, Yaranaya, Dayana, Boda, Yaranamano.